Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Garcia. I'm one of the students for the grad program here at the University of Florida in disaster management. My first semester grad program, I graduated from the FES Bachelor Program December of 2013. In this assignment, we're asked to discuss and critique one of the case studies in Chapter 2 of the text. I chose the very first case study, which was for the Richmond, Virginia Theater Fire of 1811. I'll answer some of the other questions that were asked for this assignment, but the first thing I'll do is I'll go over the critique of the case study. Stage 1 of the case study, they kind of cover what resources you have, what you need, what kind of communication plan you should have, and that's kind of the format for each of the stages. Stage 1, they discuss the structural integrity of the theater and how it was already compromised. The building was made of wood. It had a brick facade on the front. Its capacity was 300 people max. It was old and rickety even for that time in 1811. During the initial stages of this, they were going to have a performance. There was a big name actor that was supposed to perform December 26th, 1811, in this theater whose capacity was only 300 people. City services and the majority of the management for the city services, they weren't alerted about the potential dangers that could arise in this theater in the event of any kind of catastrophe, a fire, or any kind of failure. The fire marshal, he failed to ensure that the theater owners complied with the guidelines of the time, the different building codes, or not necessarily the building codes, but just the guidelines, codes, and that sort of thing with throwing an event at the theater. Stage 2 of the case study, they discuss, for example, that the fire marshal, he failed to enforce strict theater max occupancy. The theater was designed to hold 300 people max, and that was when it was built 5 years prior to this fire. 300 people as a maximum capacity was already stretching the limits of this building, of this theater, and it was going to create problems in the event of an emergency. He failed to enforce these codes with the theater company, with whoever it was that was running the theater at the time. It was due to the time of year. It was December 26th up in Virginia, so it was cold. They were expecting cold weather. The structure was made of wood, and the danger wasn't properly understood given the situation, the temperature, the climate, the integrity of the structure. City officials should have ensured that the theater owners complied with all guidelines. This is a conflict of interest that I see even in modern times, and I'll discuss that later when it comes to county or city officials. And honestly, making money in whatever capacity that is, whether it's with land deals, and even something similar to this. Say current time, current day, a city is going to throw some sort of event, some sort of show. There's always some sort of conflict of interest when it comes to safety, ensuring that there are different guidelines, building codes being followed, and obviously making money. But I'll cover that a little bit later. There's something I wanted to mention about that. Stage 3 of the case study. What had happened before the actual show, there was a high name celebrity actor who was supposed to come in, and he was going to perform at this theater troupe. And so what that did was that obviously garnered some interest, and more people wanted to buy tickets. And so what ended up happening was that 600 people ended up buying tickets for this showing, for this one-time viewing of this theater show production in a theater whose capacity was only 300. Some of the failures that occurred at this point was the fire marshal and city officials. They didn't strictly enforce 300-person max for the theater occupancy. They could have done one of a number of things. They could have said it would be multiple showings. They could have said refunds for those for the last 300 people who bought tickets, but they chose not to, and they chose to run the show as was with a 600-person audience in a 300 max occupancy theater. Also, with that occupancy way higher than it was the max, they also city officials and the fire marshal failed to be well prepared for the situation with additional fire, EMS, police at the theater in the event of an emergency. Stage 4, they actually discuss the incident, what ended up happening, being that it was 1811 and electricity wasn't most of the buildings, all of the buildings hadn't been fitted with any kind of electrical wiring. So they still worked off a candlelight, and they had a chandelier that was on the stage that had candles on it. There was This isn't in the case study. This is information that I found secondary, which I'll go ahead and I'll discuss at the end here. But there was a stagehand, a child, whose job it was to pull a rope, a linen rope or some sort of natural fiber rope. I think it said it was hemp, a hemp rope that had a chandelier that had multiple candles on it, and on the stage where they had different drapes and different stage covers and the what's the term for that? I don't know. Anyway, the sheet, the thing that actually closes and opens as the show starts, and they had multiple things all over the stage, different materials, different props and whatnot. Anyway, he was this child was pulling this rope to lift this chandelier with multiple candles on it. The candle, it made contact with one of the linens that were on the stage. It caught on fire very quickly. This kid, according to the second source that I found, was terrified, runs out the backside of the building. He's gone. He doesn't alert anybody, doesn't tell anybody. And so that's where they suspect, or that's where they're, according to the sources, state that the fire, that's how it began. Theater personnel were not prepared to evacuate patrons. They didn't have an evacuation plan. And there were, as I mentioned before, insufficient first responders on hand. Stage 5 kind of talks about the fallout of the situation. Due to the construction and the materials used in the theater, the entire building was consumed in flames within 10 minutes. And it's a dangerous situation, and obviously it's a dangerous situation, but I'm going to discuss the second source that I found, which gives a little bit more insight into what actually happened. I found a newspaper article that was posted December 26, 2011, which was the 200-year anniversary of this event. It talks about a number of things, but initially what it discusses is how the construction and the layout of the building caused for the tragedy to be much worse than it could have been. I'll quote, it says, with a single narrow staircase to the box seats and only 3 exits, one behind the stage, another for the gallery and the main front door, and the main front door opened inward, the crush of bodies that sought relief proved to be just as lethal as the fire. So as we see, and just recently, by recently I mean a handful of years ago, the Boston fire, where there was a theater and there was a small rock concert and there was pyrotechnics and things caught on fire and the doors opened inward, which is obviously, according to modern building code, is a no-no for this exact reason. When doors open inward, people start crushing, piling up toward the exits. This is pretty basic information. But once those doors get closed and there's a little bit of weight behind it, nobody's getting out. And that's what happened in this fire. There was one exit that was behind the theater stage, and there was another exit for the upper gallery for not VIPs, but for whoever happened to be up in the mezzanine or whatever it's called up there. So those 3 exits, one ended up getting sealed pretty quickly because of the bodies pushing. One was behind the theater, the actual stage that very few people in the public knew about. And the one that was up that nobody would want to go to in the event of a fire. They're trying to get out the way. It's pretty common knowledge in the fire service and in fire inspections and that sort of thing, the fire marshal, people like to come out the way they come in the event of emergency. So even if they can see signs for exits, once you're in a panic situation, once you're there's obviously some sort of threat, people hit that fight or flight response, and they don't really think rationally, and their basic instinct, basic response will be, I'm getting out the way I came in. This article what it does is it talks about how this event during this time in America was the Second Great Awakening, which was a Christian revival. It was kind of what they use the Christians of the time, they use this event to say that God hates, or God is choosing to punish those who imbibe, who drink, who party, who go to theaters, and that everyone should be going to church and be pious. And so they use this incident to kind of preach and to kind of let people know that they're living their lives the wrong way, and kind of the religious dogma that every society, every generation tends to have on some level. And what ended up happening after this building burned down? Of course, it did burn down. Let me see if I can get a body count, but there was a good amount of people died. I want to say it was around 100. Correction, 72 people were confirmed dead, 54 were women, and there were a handful of very famous people. The recently inaugurated Virginia governor, his name was George W. Smith, died. A U.S. senator and the current bank president of Virginia all died in this blaze. So after it burned, the building burned, the Second Great Awakening, this religious movement, they ended up building a church in the spot where that theater was built. And that's about what the article's about. It talks about how another theater was built a few years after this, and it ended up burning down too, 43 years later after it was built. The reason why I bring that up and how the religious right or the religious wing used this opportunity to push its political agenda is because, and it also goes hand in hand with the reason why I chose this one in particular. It's that in most jurisdictions, most cities, most counties, local politics tends to control emergency services, and local politics is driven by money. And I say that the key point of this case study, according to the text, was it stresses the importance of building codes, fire codes, and building inspections. That is kind of the crux of that case study, is that the major fault in this entire disaster was, one, the failure of that the building was older, and so it didn't follow local and current building codes. When the fire marshal was made aware of what was going to happen, of the theater, of the show, he failed to enforce those codes. And more importantly than that, city officials were made aware of this, and city officials chose to also ignore current building codes, not fine the theater production company, not delay the show, they enforced nothing because of the fact that there was a big high-name celebrity actor who generated so much interest that they were able to double book the theater, and so it's money. So it was obviously a good profit. Unfortunately, too many people died. If one person dies for money, that's too many people. The reason why, and that's the reason why I chose this, is because this kind of parallels currently. I work for Marion County Fire Rescue, which is the county just south of Alachua County. I've been a firefighter paramedic, and I'm a lieutenant. I'm on the hazmat team. I've been here for 10 years. The current socio-political climate here in Marion County, coupled with the recession from 2007-2008, has drastically affected our ability as the fire service, as emergency services, to affect local politics. This is very similar to what the fire marshal experienced for this fire in this scenario. And what that ended up happening in the long run is, for that specific incident, it affected the level of service that was possible for this event, which in turn, there was a disaster, people died, it was horrible. Currently, in Marion County Fire Rescue, because of our inability to have any effect on local politics, the politicians, the county commission, who control budgets, who generally control emergency services at their core level, at their fundamental and financial level, their constituency is in Marion County tends to be right-wing, very conservative people who are of the mindset that lower taxes at all expense, lower taxes. So because of that, over the last few years, coupled with the recession and the lower tax base, Marion County Fire Rescue has seen a very drastic and obvious decrease in level of service due to the number of personnel that we've lost, the number of resources that we no longer have. The funding has just come out from underneath us. And so this is very similar and along the same vein of what happened in 1811, when the fire marshal didn't have the resources nor the backing of his city manager, city council, to affect a specific incident, in that case, affect overall level of service in Marion County's case, due to the politicians generally controlling everything, and money tends to control politicians. As negative that may sound, unfortunately, that tends to be the case. What I was able to get also online was I found the actual newspaper illustration of the fire. And granted, this was 1811, so there was no internet, there was no video chatting, there was no blogging, there was no cameras, there was very little. So if there was ever an event, illustrators, artists had to get on scene or get to wherever the situation was and start sketching right away, because that was how images were portrayed in newspapers. I don't know if this is going to translate very well. I'm going to try. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let's see if I can get a good. So that was the actual newspaper clipping illustration in the newspaper the day after this event. I found a better image of it, but it's a replication. It was a wood engraving. Maybe you guys can see this a little bit better. So that is about as good as it's going to get for the 17th or the 19th century. I'm sorry. As far as images of this event. If it were modern day times, there would probably be 100 videos on YouTube, and every major news organization would probably have documented it. But that's it. That's what I got. Thank you very much. Once again, my name is Daniel Garcia. This is Saturday, University of Florida versus Alabama. Go Gators.